National Catholic Register. This is Register Radio, bringing light and clarity to the news and topics that affect your life.
Should Catholics identify as feminists? That was a question posed to a panel of some of the most prominent female Catholic thinkers at a recent conference at the University of Notre Dame dedicated to the Church's teaching on women. This week on Register Radio, we're joined by the conference's organizer, Abigail Favale, and Register senior editor, Jonathan Liedl, to tell us more. And we are approaching the 10th anniversary of the deaths of the Ethiopian Martyrs at the hands of ISIS. We talk with Alberto Fernandez on the legacy of these martyrs for the faith. Hello, I'm Matthew Bunson, host of Register Radio and EWTN News' vice president and editorial director. I'm joined in studio, as always, here in Washington, D.C. by Shannon Mullen, editor-in-chief of the National Catholic Register. Hi, Shannon.
Hello, Matthew.
So at Notre Dame, the panel discussion brought to a close a three-day conference, which was titled True Genius, the Mission of Women in the Church and Culture. Coinciding with the 30th anniversary of Pope St. John Paul II's 1995 letter to women, the conference explored topics like the female body and the culture of life, and the feminine genius and Catholic history. The highlight of the conference was its closing panel, bringing together a who's who of prominent female Catholic thought leaders, including Deborah Savage, Leah Libresco-Sargent, Helen Alvarez, Abigail Favale, and Angela Franks. I'm greatly happy to be joined by Abigail, who is the organizer of this conference. Abigail, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So what was the impetus to organize this conference? We have these anniversaries, but this seemed to be a very timely moment to have this conversation.
Yes, right. So it was prompted by the anniversary of Letter to Women and also Evangelium Vitae, which has a lovely section on the important role of women in cultivating a culture of life. And it's in that section, actually, that John Paul II uses the phrase new feminism for the first time. So that's one of the reasons we featured it in the conference, to kind of revisit that concept and see how it has aged in the last 30 years and where we should go with it now. But to your point, I think we're in an interesting cultural moment when it comes to questions of women. There are distorted narratives from various sides of the culture. There are some ideas emerging within certain Catholic circles that I think offer a more heterodox view of the relationship between men and women, that, like, for example, emphasizing one-sided obedience on the part of women, or even questioning if NFP is licit. And then on the other side, we still have very much secular feminist ideas and the misperception that the church is anti-woman. And so I think there's a great need in this particular moment to both recover but also deepen the questions that John Paul II was raising 30 years ago and apply them to our current context, which is facing some of the same problems that have been around for 30 years, but also we're facing new ones as well.
The conference coincided with a sort of a pointed exchange of views on some of these topics that played out on the pages of the Wall Street Journal. Jonathan, can you give us a brief summary of how that provided another dimension to the conference?
Yeah, absolutely. It was kind of the elephant in the room because one of the keynote speakers at this conference was Erika Bakiaki, who's a fellow of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and she had written a few weeks earlier in the Wall Street Journal a piece sort of kind of highlighting some of the points Abigail just made, that there's this sort of rise of a Catholic manosphere, you might say, that emphasizes kind of one-sided obedience. And Bakiaki made the point that this isn't just reacting against the excesses of secular feminism, but it seems to be cutting against the teachings of Pope John Paul II, who, as she pointed out, at least on one occasion, identified himself as the feminist pope, and also, as Abigail said, in Evangelium Vitae, called for a new feminism. So that was kind of the opening argument, and then it prompted responses by actually Bakiaki's colleague at the EPPC, Carrie Gress, who wrote a piece contending that although John Paul II used a term like feminism, and he used it pretty sparingly, it really wasn't central to his thought. and then finally Margaret McCarthy, who is a theologian at the John Paul II Institute at CUA, added on, suggesting that Bacchiacchi had kind of diluted the Pope's teaching down to soundbite. So it was certainly, when I was there covering this event, the final piece in that exchange had been published 2 days earlier. And so in the hallways, obviously everyone was excited about what was going on at the conference, but there was definitely a lot of conversation about what had just taken place in the Wall Street Journal. And I think it, and obviously, I interviewed Abigail about this, and I think it just, if anything, it suggests that, the teaching of John Paul II on women, on the complementarity of the sexes, on feminine genius is so new, right? And there's still so much more to unpack from it. And so it seems like there's still some unpacking to do, and some differences of opinion among a lot of very serious and intelligent Catholic women who are by and large on the same page on a lot of other things.
Abigail, for you, theologically speaking, what was John Paul talking about when he called for a new feminism?
Well, I think John Paul II is very interested, and not just in his 1995 writings, but he's very interested in the dignity of women and developing the Church's understanding of the dignity of women. And so I think what he was calling for in that moment was saying there needs to be a concerted attention to the dignity of women and to responding to different forces in society that are undermining that dignity. But he says in that passage, we need a new feminism. So I think what he means, we need a different movement that defends women's dignity, that does not, what he says, replicate models of masculine domination, right? So it's interesting because that phrase both has a kind of pointed critique at the old feminism, you might say. But I think what he's saying is we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, even as we're maybe critiquing the way in which secular feminism has responded to the question of women's dignity. We can't abandon the need to defend women's dignity. And in fact, so I think overall his posture toward feminism and the movement towards women's liberation is let's retain what can be retained and reject what needs to be rejected, right? So let's baptize what we can baptize, but then also abandon what we can't embrace as Catholics.
I guess a question that it's a casual listener or even just the average Catholic would ask is, how do we do that? How do we discern and find a way to look at feminism? Because there are today very many negative connotations, certainly from the Catholic standpoint.
Right. So, we do it by grounding ourselves very firmly in a Catholic worldview, a Catholic anthropology, and a really robust spiritual life, first and foremost. But I think it's pretty easier, like you mentioned, sort of to identify the tension points, right? I think overall, secular feminism has offered a model of women's rights and dignity that is very reductive and reduces women's freedom to access to abortion and contraception, right? So that's a no-go from a Catholic perspective. But at the same time, if we think about expanding women's access to education, allowing women to develop and cultivate their full personhood, which includes their intellectual capacities. And something that the magisterium has emphasized in recent decades is the need for women's particular influence to be felt in every sphere of society, right? So those are all aspects, I think, of maybe sympathy or connection between the feminist movement and a Catholic way of understanding women.
Of course, men factor into this broader conversation here, and this is a fraught moment. It seems like culturally, men and women, broadly speaking, are going in different directions in terms of economic success, educational attainment, political affiliation, and marriage. So in a recent Pew survey, roughly half of women said that being married was not a priority to them, not important for a fulfilling life. That's compared to about 40% of men. Jonathan, this is a topic that you've written about, the marriage crisis, which is really a dating crisis also. So how do men play into this conversation that's unfolding right now?
Well, I think maybe I can speak as a man, but I think part of what Abigail and some of these other scholars are attempting to address is this reaction that we do see among some men, and including in Catholic circles, which responds to some of the missteps, the excesses of secular feminism. But it responds by, I think, Abigail, when I interviewed you, you said some of these things look like Protestant fundamentalism, right, which is the tradition that you grew up in. And so I guess I would say, like, kind of just echoing what Abigail said, you know, for guys to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, you can look at some of these trends that maybe have men feeling adrift in a lot of ways, but not respond with seeking to dominate, right, and not responding with using Scripture as proof text for sort of like exerting a kind of influence and authority that, in some sense, you haven't earned. So I think that's kind of a dangerous trend right now, but I think it's an opportunity for men to discover that whatever power and authority they have been given by God, whatever that looks like in the context of dating, relationship, or marriage, but it's always for the sake of another, right? Always for the sake of service. And so I think that's something, hopefully, that people can at least stay grounded in the midst of, what really is shaping up to be a deep divide between the sexes right now, especially among younger people.
Do you have a response to that, Abigail?
Yeah, I think that was really well put. I mean, I think the Catholic vision is going to offer a sense of solidarity between the sexes, right? And our flourishing is mutual, right? Women can only really flourish if men are flourishing as well, and vice versa. And so I think this is another way in which, whether you want to call it feminism or not, a Catholic attention to the questions of man and woman in our time and the relationships between the sexes is going to offer a model not of competition, but of reciprocity and solidarity. And those are the things that are really emphasized, again, in John Paul II's writings on these topics, which is why I think he is really a voice that we need in this moment.
Yeah, well, fascinating conversation. I know there's a lot more for us to unpack, and I think, Shannon, we can assume that this is a topic that, A, is not going to be going away, but also that we'll be covering even more intensely at the Register.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you to both of you. You can find all of these discussions at ncregister.com, in particular Jonathan's piece, 30 years after John Paul II's New Feminism, Catholic Debate is Heating Up. Well, you're listening to Register Radio on EWTN Radio. Coming up, we have the 10th anniversary of the Ethiopian Martyrs. Probably don't remember it. We're going to talk with Ambassador Alberto Fernandez about it here on Register Radio.
Let's return to Register Radio on EWTN.
Welcome back. I'm Matthew Bunson here with Shannon Mullen. Well, 10 years ago, the evil Islamist terror organization ISIS announced that it had murdered 21 Egyptian Christian construction workers. Their martyrdom made international headlines and led to the declaration by the Coptic Orthodox Church that they were saints and martyrs. That same year, however, was another massacre of approximately 30 Ethiopian Christians at the hands of ISIS. To mark this anniversary and honor their memory, we're joined by Alberto Fernandez, a former U.S. diplomat and contributor at EWTN News, who has a piece on the Ethiopian Orthodox martyrs, a forgotten martyrdom, and a call for human fraternity that you can find at ncregister.com. Ambassador, welcome back to Register Radio.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be on with you guys.
Well, I have the sense that we remember the Coptic martyrs, and we should, but there's an odd feeling I have that many people have forgotten about these Ethiopian martyrs.
Yes, I think that's true, and there's probably more than one reason. First of all, of course, they came later. So the Coptic martyrs was in February of 2015, and the Ethiopians were in April right around Eastertide in 2015. So there was a lot of angst when the first happened, and I think less attention when the second happened. You could also say, they were both groups of African Orthodox Christians, but Ethiopians maybe get less attention than Egyptians do. It was more of an African issue and less of a Middle Eastern issue.
Yeah, to that point, Alberto, it was interesting when I Googled the Ethiopian Martyrs, your story that you just wrote for the Register, Forgotten Martyrdom and a Call for Human Fraternity, I think was number 2. So
great SEO.
So you've really cast a light. So part of your piece is reminding us of these individuals who lost their lives 10 years ago, but a lot of it is looking at the video that was produced around their deaths. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's of course the fascinating, troubling difference between the two. The first ISIS video with the Coptic martyrs was a slaughter video, snuff video, showed people being killed, but it was threatening Europe. Right, we're coming. It was from North Africa, from Libya. We're coming. We're going to conquer Rome. We're going to conquer Europe. We're going to break the crosses and convert you to Islam. It was kind of a threat to the West. The second video, the Ethiopian video, was actually much longer, and it was a kind of a treatise, you could say, an ideological or theological treatise directed towards Muslims, mostly, in Arabic, about why you should hate Christians, why Christians should suffer, why should they be killed. It was kind of like a primer or a didactic work that, in a way, makes it maybe even more horrifying in that it sought to radicalize Muslims to say, you don't dislike Christians enough. You have to dislike them more. You have to be more proactive against them.
I noticed in your piece that you talk about the fact that in this video they have skewed, as you put it, hostile telling of Christian history and using extensive footage from Hollywood movies, including Kingdom of Heaven, which is something of an irony because that was a fairly anti-Catholic film in its own right.
Kingdom of Heaven is one of the most popular movies in jihadist propaganda. I've seen it used many times. Obviously, you can think why. It's anti-Catholic. It's anti-Christian. It's kind of how horrible the Crusades were and all of that. And that fits into kind of certain Islamist tropes about the West, the Americans or the Westerners being the new Crusaders. So, Kingdom of Heaven, very popular among jihadists.
Mm-hmm. And then you also note, of course, the Passion of the Christ. For this type of a video and trying to make their point, it clearly did not succeed for them in the long term. But what's the legacy of this today? In other words, where are we with ISIS, certainly in North Africa?
Well, unfortunately, ISIS in North Africa is weak, but ISIS in Africa is advancing into sub-Saharan Africa in the Sahel and moving south. So you have ISIS in Somalia, ISIS in Congo, ISIS in Mozambique, in Nigeria, in Burkina Faso, slaughtering Christians, targeting churches every single day. The video that I referred to, which was in Arabic, it speaks to a view which exists in the Muslim world, a minority view maybe, but certainly a view that exists in the Muslim world. But if it's been rejected in the Arabic-speaking world, it's found a new rebirth in sub-Saharan Africa. That's very distressing.
Alberto, you said that the murder of the Coptic Christians 2 months before the Ethiopians was really directed at Europe and the West. In those 10 years, what can you say about the jihadist progress in Europe? And what does that picture look like today?
Well, they failed in the macro is they failed to continue to replicate what was a pattern that they developed 2015, 16, 17, which is highly orchestrated mass casualty operations in the West, whether in the United States or in Western Europe. Those have become less common. The last big type of thing that happened, of course, was not even in Western Europe. It would have been the Moscow attack by the Islamic State Khorasan province, which was like about a year and a half ago. That's the closest thing to a kind of big, spectacular plot. But what they've gotten, of course, are lots of small occasions of an individual killing a person or two, or using a car, or something like that. Those have proliferated, while the kind of massive, centrally directed ISIS spectacular attack, which is what they really want, those have become less common as Western governments maybe have strengthened their defenses.
Yeah, so you also make a very important point in your piece, and that the back end of the title of the piece, which is A Call for Human Fraternity, because you then discuss the work of Pope Francis, especially the Abu Dhabi Declaration, which Pope Francis signed in 2019. As you say, while derided by some Francis critics in the West as some sort of concession, the document set a clear goal of creating much-needed space and breathing room for the Christians of the East. How has that panned out in the 5 years since?
I think it has panned out well. There's a kind of a demographic that appeals to in the Muslim world. Pope Francis has his critics in the East as well as in the West, but there are plenty of people that can point to the Abu Dhabi Declaration or point to his advocacy for peace in the region, peace in Gaza, in the Muslim world, who see him with respect. And to be frank, and this is unfortunately this is the way the world is, that gives greater protection to Christians in the East. I mean, it's not a ironclad protection, but if you hate a leader, if you hate a nation, you're going to try to lash out against people that you think are somehow connected. That's the way a kind of extremist mindset works. So the fact that the Abu Dhabi Declaration is seen as a respectable, decent thing in the East and in the Muslim world by elites and by regimes is a good thing for Eastern Christians.
Ambassador, what, if anything, do we know, if we could bring it back to the martyrs themselves, about these 30 Ethiopians?
We know that they were migrants. They were trying to get into Western Europe. They were not all poor. Some of them were what you would call kind of well-educated young men. They were all men who wanted a better life. They wanted to help their families, and they paid thousands of dollars to get to Libya. One account has one guy. In East Africa, people use cell phones to kind of pay off big debts like this, and he would periodically call his families and say, okay, release a third of the money or release half of the money. And once he crossed over the Libyan border, of course, he went dark because he'd been taken by the terrorists. But, these were people who were looking for a better future and who wanted to get to Libya and then go across the Mediterranean into Europe. And they didn't even make it to the boat. They got caught by ISIS before that and horribly killed. Fortunately, ISIS has been defeated in Libya, at least for now.
And what is the legacy here, certainly from the standpoint of the Ethiopian churches?
Well, I mean, that's something we will see soon. Of course, we haven't quite reached the anniversary. It's in a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. And it took place a week after Orthodox Easter. This year, of course, both of our Easters coincide, and the date is actually Holy Saturday during Holy Week. So I, like others, am looking. I know Ethiopians are very much aware of this date, but I'm very much looking to see what the commemorations are going to look like in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador, for bringing this to our readers' attention. If you could just, have they been declared martyrs in the Catholic Church, or how might that work out?
It's not exactly the same. Pope Francis pointedly put the Coptic martyrs on the Roman martyrology. So that was a very specific step that he took. He spoke very movingly, and I mentioned that in the piece, to the the Ethiopian Orthodox Patriarch when this terrorist attack, this terrorist killing happened. But I don't know if there's been follow-up as far as the Catholic Church about recognizing them formally. Probably informally has already occurred, but formally as martyrs. Of course, the Ethiopians do recognize them as martyrs.
Well, Ambassador, once again, thank you for bringing this to our attention.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for this week for Register Radio. Remember, for more news, analysis, and commentary, check out the National Catholic Register online at ncregister.com. Until next week, on behalf of our producer, Michael McCall, and my co-host, Shannon Mullen, I'm Matthew Bunson. Please, take care, and God bless.